I know we're arguing about everything. We're arguing about tunnels, we're arguing about no tunnels, we're arguing about sites versus temperate, who gets all the money, all that kind of stuff. He said, that's all fine. You have to go through that stuff. But put in context the larger things that are going on in order to know how your behavior and your agency's interest is going to be affected. And that's what Andy's speech was so good today. If you look at the trend line on the available water supply over a very long time, guess what? In recorded history, since 85 or 90, one of those years, since we've started to record it, it's pretty flat. Now, it varies from year to year. He had that wonderful chart you saw, the variations. And that variation is, of course, opportunity and disaster at the same time. But if your supply of a commodity is relatively stable, but the demands on the water supply seem to grow with the number of people, the size of the economy, the development of new and different interests, power generation, environmental interests, and so on, there's a time where, you know, a static supply is not easily able to satisfy all demands. One of the things about the drought that's most amazing to me, by the way, how many people have died because of the drought? Zip. Zip. Now that's a testament to the water management and system that we all condemn, but is a really proud tribute of the state of California. Not one death attributable to the drought. Not one in the entire state of California. There's an argument, by the way, that warmer temperature has led to West Nile virus, which has increased the people who die from it. But boy, if you got to blame drought for that, it's a real reach. Economic losses, to be sure, but relatively modest economic losses. We've managed to develop a water system in California that's as responsive as we allow it to be. And here's what Jay says. Here's he has 6 things that he thinks are going to that are happening now and will happen in the future, whether you build tunnels or don't build tunnels, whether you build new reservoirs or don't build new reservoirs, whether you spend $80 trillion on flood control or not. This is what a very prominent scientist said about it. And here's the first. The Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta will export less water and some islands will flood. I don't know of any scientist or hydrologist that looks at the situation and comes to much different solution. And of course, from a mountain county's perspective, the more water that's exported from the Delta, the greater the pressures on you to somehow provide increases in supply. But put the self-interest aside, the fact of the matter is, much like most water sources that are developed, even the Colorado River, time and human demands and impositions on water use means you run up against that imaginary but real line where the demand exceeds the supply, and we got to look at doing something else. Now that's what your water managers do as a matter of habit, but of course the public is not as involved, and this is not. One of the things that Jay's mentioned in one sentence is worth your note. Ending groundwater overdraft will increase demands for Delta water. This is the old lesson, be careful what you ask for, you may get it. And there is no doubt about the fact that for those people, particularly the Central Valley ag interests, that are heavily dependent on underground water and have been depleting the reservoirs for some time, the sources for some time, you can't realistically, I don't think Jason's going to stand up and say, oh yeah, we got to reduce our underground water use and we won't ask for any water from the Delta. Oh, I don't believe that. I believe people will. And that, of course, is pursuant to the demand that as public officials, you should give to people whatever they want, even if you can't. And promise if you can't. You know, if you can't deliver, at least give them a promise. The second thing he says, which is highly controversial, is the San Joaquin Valley will have less irrigated land. I think that's probably true. You've all heard the discussions about the salt and selenium-tainted lands in the valley. You understand all the problems of use of water and facing clay tables that somehow force that farther up. The discussions going on in Washington on settlement between Westlands and others and the federal government on CVP is simply, it's supposed to retire what, Jason, 100,000 acres of land, roughly. But the point of the matter is, I'll give you an example. The year after the legislature passed its big water package in 2009, same year, for the first time in my political career, I was invited to attend a meeting of Western growers. I mean, I'm a Democrat, I'm an environmentalist, all that stuff. And both of us were surprised, A, that I was surprised they invited me, and B, they were surprised I was coming. Well, we were talking about the legislation, and we were on a panel. All the water guys up front know these panelists. It was John Herring, the water lawyer from the Delta. It was Dan Nelson, who then the chief executive officer of Delta Mendota, and innocent little me. And the conversation was, what did this legislation mean? What was it all about? By the way, this is what I've been carrying around since 2009, the actual legislation that created the Delta Stewardship Council and said develop a Delta plan. And in the middle of it, these are 250, I was going to say mom and pop growers. These are big guys. These are big guys. It's in Las Vegas in one of the fancy casinos. There are 250 people in the audience, and it's not my usual audience to speak to. But in conversation about the use, Dan said, kind of offhandedly, well, we know we can't farm 8 or 9 million acres of land each and every year. We know that. I said to myself, God, if I'd said that, they would have shot me. They would have shot me dead. This is the difference between public conversation and private conversation that we need. The argument on Valley Ag land is really the argument about expectations. It's everything else. Is the water supply of California to guarantee a desired income for everybody in the state, if that's what it's about? I mean, it may be. It's certainly hope and expectation. But the point is, Jay thinks, I think too, that there will be adjustments in land being irrigated, and that will make a difference. It will not solve all the problems. Nothing solves all the problems. Dave and I were just chatting about the fact that real people always complain, why can't you get to work and solve those problems? And my rap goes as follows. When's the last time you knew of any society that had a perfect education system? How about any society who delivered health care to everyone? How about societies that have abolished poverty forever? Well, look, we go through this exercise of introspection and occasional action in something like 30 to 50 year increments, and we kind of lurch forward. Something happens, something changes. There are a lot of unexpected consequences. Jay's third point, urban areas will use less water, reuse more wastewater, and capture more stormwater. You're seeing all the signs of that right now. The PPIC study, they gave report cards on water consumption and use during the drought, gave urban dwellers an A. I think it's too high. They didn't pay any attention to me, but I'm on the PPIC board to confess up to that. But they gave them, because the urban savings are relatively easy to do. My neighbors who condemn everyone for not being allowed to water their lawn 4 times a week, notwithstanding, there were virtually no disruptions other than cosmetic in urban areas around the state. I understand you're going to find some examples somewhere, but not there. The urban area is a success, but because the urban use of water, business, commercial, non-agricultural, and human use of water is roughly 9.5, 10 million acre feet per year, roughly 10% of the water used. You can only go so far with that, but it's the one where you can make the short changes by adjusting behavior. Political note. I have learned the hardest thing in public life to do is change human behavior. It's a lot easier to pass a law than to get people to like it and to pay attention to it. Jay says, the next thing, but this shows how controversial he is. Some wild native species will become unsustainable. And you know, all the environmental organizations go nuts because the Endangered Species Act says you've got to save everything. It doesn't quite say that, by the way, but that's how the political debate goes. Yes, I think that's likely to happen. And for those of you, and there are a couple in the audience, I suppose, who would say, well, that's good. We get rid of that stupid Delta smelt, then we don't have to talk about it anymore. But behind the Delta smelt are things called salmon. And it's not as easy to dismiss a salmon as a Delta smelt. And the point of this is, the water use for human beings is irreversibly linked to the environmental consequences of transforming our society and building all the structures to save, collect, distribute, and use water. And whether it's, you know, I suppose you could visualize, Donald Trump will come in and abolish the Endangered Species Act, the Clean Drinking Water Act. You can do whatever you want, anytime you want, and nobody, I mean, if you believe that, then maybe you should just wait for it to happen. But the practicality is, and for managers, you have to live day to day. The discussion about how sites was going to go through the application process is a hard, infinitely complex management discussion of how agencies and interested parties try to respond. Water solutions and funding will become more local and regional. Now you say, oh, I don't like that, and it's the state's supposed to do what the feds are doing. Now, I shouldn't do this, but everywhere I go and give speeches, I usually do one quiz question and make people write down their answers. But PPIC did a study a couple of years ago of all the major water spending within the state of California by the federal government, the state government, and local governments. And they discovered that for everything, capital improvement, operations and maintenance, everything, it was between 30 and 40 billion dollars a year. 30, that's, you know, over time, that's a lot of money. But here's the question. How much of that did the feds contribute, the state, and the locals? And, you know, I'm not going to bore you with the answer. Here it goes. The feds contributed between 3 and 4%. This is, by the way, for water supply, wastewater treatment, and flood control. The feds did between 3 and 4%. The state did 12%. You all did 83%. And that single fact alone shows why we have a localized and relatively diffused water system in the state of California, because locals pay for the lion's share of that water system. Jay thinks, I think too, that's likely to change only to increase the local costs somewhat. Now, as a former mayor and city councilman, I am fully cognizant of what we used to call the political game of milking the federal or the state cow whenever we had an idea we wanted funded. Not that water people would ever think of that as a possibility under any circumstances. Well, of course you would. But I think you've got to be practical about the limits of what's being delivered. The sites discussion this morning was a very practical discussion because the legislature and the voter-approved bond, legislature developed voter-approved bonds, contain provisions designed to protect larger public interest, largely environmental interest for species and water quality in the Delta for that money. So the thing you got to think about is, what do we need to do if we have to carry that same share of cost forward? Point number 6, and the last point. Jay says in the future, water will be managed more tightly. Now, he's not entirely clear what he means, but he's pretty clear that it involves increased reporting of actual water use, human water use, agricultural water use, environmental water use, and the notion that the urban and agricultural water management plans that you all participate in developing will become, in many ways, enforceable documents. Now, I say those things only because Politics tends to ignore the context and just concentrate on, I don't know, the Delta debate and the tunnels debate is the least interesting debate in the water issues of California, in my opinion. Because whether you build it or don't, the other underlying problems remain and must be addressed. So, what does that all mean for water managers? Well, I guess it means don't screw it up. What else could it mean? You are in the best of times and the worst of times, as the saying goes. You have a kind of average water year this year, but it's going to look like it's not. It's going to look like a fifth year of the drought in a little bit. And nobody knows what next year is going to bring. But you saw major changes in legislation attributable to the drought finally impressing the media and the public that something was going on, that they were concerned about. They're not as concerned this year as they were the previous year, but they're still concerned. So how you do that is an art form. I mean, there's no science in this. When you have to go to your constituents and tell them you're going to increase water rates 3% a year for the next 4 years, I bet you will get a lot of kickback from a lot of places up here. But the point of the matter is, your managers, whether you're elected managers or appointed managers, you're managers, and you make this system work so that in a real 4-year drought, 4.5-year drought, we didn't see anybody die because of the drought, and that is a remarkable tribute to you and your industry. So anyway, I give these speeches now only occasionally, and I thought I would just thank you very much for allowing me to do so, and thanking John for inviting me. Did you want me to answer any questions if there are any? I don't know if there are any. Yeah, there don't have to be any. No. Okay, thank you very much.